Welcome to Solutions OP Clinical Trials Podcast. My name is Olga and I'm the Managing Director of Solutions OP. We are a small team of experienced professionals working on clinical trials in the United Kingdom. I'll use our podcast to discuss hot topics in clinical trials and provide analysis of the latest trends and challenges in pharma and medical device industries, not just in the UK but globally. Thank you for listening. In today's episode, we will discuss what are the benefits and challenges of real-world data. Real-world data is a very hot topic among regulatory agencies at the moment. They're looking to see more data when they're approving drugs and medical devices. So today we'll just discuss some of the challenges and benefits of using real-world data. But let's start first with what are the differences between clinical trial data and real-world data. So in clinical trials, the data is very controlled and consistent and has a high scientific value. But it's a small set of data and it doesn't always capture long-term safety data. So, for example, even if you have one drug which is studied for 5 or 10 years, this is still not sufficient in a long-term use. If patients have to use it for years and years and years, for example, you need to have a lot more safety data for this particular drug, for example. So, in real-world data, then it's usually data which is collected from electronic medical records or registries or commercially available medical devices or mobile apps. It could be consumers' complaints and so on. So it's a lot of data which is something collected as we call it, real world. So what about the real-world data? What are the complications here? So it's a low-quality data with a lot of options for bias. Generally, the results cannot be reproduced, which is a really big challenge. However, the real-world data provides opportunity to establish how a device or medication works in a larger patient population. It also allows to collect data about medical device defects, misuse, or off-label use. So while it's a lower quality data, real-world data could be actually beneficial when it's provided as addition to a clinical trial data. And I think this is why the regulatory agencies are so keen to see more real-world data. In this part, we'll discuss why they're so keen to see real-world data. So according to a systemic review of FDA approvals, 85% of new drug approvals from January 2019 through June 2021 include real-world evidence. There is also an interest from the regulatory agencies around the world to request real-world evidence as part of approval or post-marketing surveillance of medical devices or new drugs. I even have a bit of experience in the past. We had a clinical trial where we used a commercially available test for glucose monitoring. It's really interesting, the use of combination of both. It could provide you really a massive amount of data, but there are a lot of challenges in terms of analysis and just identifying what is really clinically significant and relevant for the patients. So there are a lot of challenges, but again, all the agencies are very keen to see the real world data. So what are the benefits of the real world evidence? they allow to collect additional safety, efficacy, and performance data for medical devices and drugs. So obviously this is the the big thing. But they also provide evidence to expand indication of use, and it's very often used, especially in countries and regions where there is a public health care. There are treatment guidelines, of course. There are drugs which are approved, but very often hospitals and different university, even organizations, they run their own clinical trials to show if a specific drug could be used for a different indication. And often these are observational clinical trials or, any other type of real-world evidence studies where they collect data, and if they have sufficient data, they could actually change their own treatment guidelines on a country level. So I think this is another reason why the regulatory agencies are so keen to have this data, because it could provide opportunities to explore, if the currently available treatments could actually be used for different indications on a local level. Another benefit is that collection of data in traditional clinical trials is sometimes impractical or unethical. And in this case, you can use the real-world evidence as an alternative. So, for example, if it's not possible to have a placebo-controlled clinical trial, you might have an observational study or a natural history study where you will collect information about the current standard of care treatment for this medical indication, and you can use then that data to compare to the data that you have from your device or from your drug trial that you've conducted. So that's about the benefits, and I think there is a potential in the real world data, but there are also risks in the real world data, and we'll talk a little bit about them too. So the one of the biggest risks is that it's a low quality and it's inconsistent data. And this is simply because how you collect that data. It could be from different sources. Sometimes these sources might not be necessarily up to date, or they might not contain all the information that you need. And this is something that everyone is aware that this is the situation with real world data. Another big risk is the data review bias. So that's basically, different people have different way of managing disease. So if you think about different hospitals or different physicians, even if you have a standard of treatment guidelines, they might still manage their patients in a different way. And based on that, you can have different results for these patients. So, for example, someone could manage some patients better than others, and it could be the other way around in another hospital or with another physician. So that inevitably will bring some bias into your data. Another thing that we need to consider is that the data sources may be biased as well. For example, sometimes we use registries. So the registries are basically a database with patients who have expressed interest to participate in clinical trials. So that registry might not be up to date. So you might not have the whole medical history for these patients, or you may have patients, for example, who are not necessarily from a poor background. You might have more educated patients in this registry who have more experience in participating in clinical trials. And if you go after such registry, you automatically exclude a lot of patients, you know, who don't have experience with clinical trials, who might be from a poor background, you know. So it creates a lot of bias and a lot of complexity when you analyze that kind of data. And the last major point in terms of risks is that the data cannot be reproduced. It's difficult, it's challenging, even in the highly controlled clinical trials. Sometimes you see confirmatory studies that actually don't confirm what they're supposed to confirm. So it's really challenging, not just for clinical trials, but for real world data. It's even more challenging to have a reproducible data. And yet, there are some steps that we can take to improve the quality of the real world data. So many regulatory agencies, they have their own guidelines on real world data, and they also have recommendations. Some countries, they have scientific advice that you can submit and discuss your study while you're still in designing it. For example, this is the case in the UK and also in the FDA in the United States. And I think it's a really good option, especially if you're planning to collect a lot of data and to use that data to support a marketing authorization or approval of your device. It is really a good idea to go through scientific advice and see what they can recommend you and how they can help you to build a really good study, a reliable one that at the end of the day, you know, when you have the data and you go to the agencies, they'll be happy with it. Because this is very important, of course, an important part. So what are the main points that we can consider in improving the design of and the quality of the real world data? So first we have to consider how participants will be recruited and if the database used meets the requirements for size, coverage and representation. So of course you want to have different people considered, not just specific ones. As I said, with the registry, sometimes this is an issue. So this is an important part to think how you're going to identify your participants for the study. Another important part is how up-to-date is the database that you will be using for the study to collect data. The issue is, for example, in the UK, the hospital databases, they're not connected, which means if you are working with GPs will have some information. But if a patient is admitted in a local hospital somewhere, the GP may not have access to this information. Or they may not have the most up-to-date information from the local hospital. So this is something that you need to think about when you're designing your study, how up-to-date will be the data and what you can use. Ideally, if you can use different sources, this is, of course, the best option. And of course, would the database contain sufficient details, for the purpose of your study? So this is why, as I said, I think using different sources is always a better option than just going for one source. Another thing that we need to mention is how the changes in the data collections will be handled. So, for example, you have a patient that is seen in one hospital, but the patient decides to move a house and they go into another city or town or village. So what happens with the data? How are you going to make sure you have this data collected? You make sure you have consistency, you have the most up-to-date information. So these are things that you need to think and plan when you're designing your study. Another important point is how you will assure that the data collected from different centers and regions of the world is consistent and comparable. And here I'll give a very good example. For example, patients in Asia have different lab ranges than patients in Europe. So if you have to compare data from patients in Asia and patients in Europe, you likely have different lab ranges, and the way they assess adverse events in Asia could be different from the way they're assessed in Europe. For example, what I've observed in my practice is that the hospitals in Asia, they tend to report grade 1 adverse events, while in the UK, for example, they will unlikely report grade 1 events. They will more likely report grade 2 and 3 and so on, but they will not really go into grade 1 events. They'll consider them more like clinically not significant. So that kind of things, you need to think how you make it consistent, how you make sure the data that you have is comparable between the different regions. And another thing that it needs to be considered is what additional resources could be used in terms of data and if they've been validated previously. So that's a very important part again. If you're using a registry, is that registry being used in research in the past? Have they produced some reliable data? And, how up to date is this registry as well? Because, of course, it might be not very up to date. Sometimes people express interest and then, when you approach them, they might not be interested or the information might not be up to date. So that's something that you need to, of course, consider. And another big thing is, of course, the data protection. In Europe, we have quite a strict data protection law. So data protection is another thing when you're collecting data, even for observational study. You need to assure that patients' data, you're collecting only the data which is necessary for the research, and no additional data is collected. So this is another very important part. So what I can say in conclusion about real-world data, yes, there are big challenges with it. It's not easy to design such study and to produce good, reliable data, but it could be a really beneficial addition to clinical trial data, which is it's known to be limited in terms of amount of patients treated, and also in terms of exposure to the drug or device. So I think there is definitely a benefit of using real world data, but of course there are lots of challenges, and when regulatory agencies are reviewing the data, they need to consider these challenges as well. And I think they're all very much up to date and understand the challenges of collecting such data. Thank you for listening. I hope that was interesting, and I'll be preparing a next episode for you. Goodbye.